So, in your group of 4, you're going to think about this movement. So, for example, this group you can be abduction in the shoulder joint. So you've worked out abduction is the arm and the trunk moving away from each other. Right, now if I do, I'll give you a bit of a heads up. If I do this, it's the distal moving relative to the proximal, right? So, but I could just as easily, well, I'd like to think of a way, think of a way that you could do abduction with the proximal moving away from the distal. And I want you to think of as many different orientations. So you're going to come up with lots of different orientations of where and how this movement can happen. That's orientations. And variable proximal relative to distal. So you might come up with variations where they both move, or where one moves and the other doesn't move, or this, that and the other. But how many different orientations, i.e. positions, can you come up with abduction at the shoulder joint? So that group of 4 there, you are the flexion in the hip joint, so you know what flexion is? Yep. So again, it could be proximal moving relative to distal, it could be how many different orientations, and that you're going to coach them in and note them down because you're going to teach the other group, the other groups. That 4 up the back, you can be extension in the elbow joint. Alright, so the elbow joint straightening. If that gets boring, I'll find something else for you. And then you guys can be side flexion in the spine. Okay? How many different positions, how many different permutations? Do you want to do a rotation?
Yeah, we can do rotation.
It's more complicated. Huh? You could do rotation in the shoulder joint. It's more complicated. That's 1. You've got to come up with 25. Start off with elbow extension, just so that people can. It's a hinge joint, and then when you get bored, I'll think of something else.
Now I'm just thinking about shorter distance.
I'm sure there's a situation where someone's about to start or they really
Short.
What? Example? Did I say it wasn't? That's not possible. No, no, but it doesn't matter. I mean, all we're doing is making an extension.
I'm just saying in the school.
Not necessarily, but then that was just what he's doing.
No, I'm just saying that if that has, it seems to me that if that has, we're moving faster. Whereas if you're moving to this year,
Yes,
so that's what you're saying, that's how we're going to do it. No. Okay, sorry. So,
flexion.
Ask them to do it. Don't
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1 foot slightly in front of your, sorry, 1 foot, choose whatever foot you prefer. Take a slight step forward so that you'll... Sorry. Is that better?
Yes, it's a nice screen.
And feel balanced on your foot. That's a distal movement with moving your foot away from your hip. And then bend slightly forward over that foot. And that is a flexion movement. And then wriggle your hips to the left and to the right, like a twist. And that is we're moving the proximal.
So we're doing the twist.
Yes, you can actually add your distal arms in if you'd like to.
Yeah, so it's literally the twist.
Yeah.
So actually your hips are in flexion and they're adducting and abducting action.
Yeah.
Or rotating, depending on how you
And they're rotating.
If it was rotating, there would be more flexion.
Yeah, so Jane is actually, the way Jane was doing it was more AD adduction because she's just taking it pelvis left and right, whereas Carol was rotating over her hip. She's twisting, yeah? See the difference?
Twisted than me.
So side to side, your hips are just AD adducting actually. Inflection. Now they're rotating inflection. Very nice distinction. You're getting a little bit fancy over there, as you speak. Pass the baton. If there was going to be a group that was a bit fancy. So teach your colleagues.
Where do we go? Oh, we can go for that. If you kneel down on your knees, put your hands on your knees. And if you lean forward, keeping your hands attached to your knee, lean forward and lean back. That's proximal to distal in your elbow, bending your elbow.
We like doing these lessons because we like people bowing.
Well, that's why I was doing it. I'm used to this.
Yeah.
I live in Asia.
And then you can slide down and up.
And then it's proximal to distal if you just move your hands backwards and forwards. The elbows moving. That was the answer.
Very nice. Is that clear? So think about, well actually both, now that's a tricky one. What is moving?
Well, that one, it's distal to proximal when it's hands, and the other one is proximal to distal.
As your elbows come back, it's both, right?
Is it?
Because this one's moving a little bit as well.
Oh.
If the proximal, in this instance, that this is the proximal segment of the arm.
Sorry, yeah.
If this was not moving, it was purely distal to proximal, it would be this.
So we did everything.
Yeah, and I said you can. It doesn't have to be just proximal to distal because often our movements are a bit of both. And it doesn't really matter. It's just interesting.
Thank you. Very kind. Okay, we're doing side flexion in the spine. Everyone has to stand up. And we did a few movements, and they felt kind of similar, and they look kind of similar. But the thing is, how do we tell if they're proximal or distal? And the most obvious way was to see if we chopped the limb off, if we could still do the movement. So chopped off the distal, would the movement still happen? So if you stand straight, bend, open your legs slightly, and turn either way. That's all the same way. And flex through the hip. Now you can do that moving your arm out. So is your arm pulling you, or is that coming from your hip or your pelvis or whatever? It's still going to happen if you remove that. So remove your arm, and we feel that means it's a proximal movement because it is coming from the trunk.
Yeah. You
can still do it. You're still pushing with your arm, but your arm's not doing the movement.
Yeah, and this is a trick question because there's endless debate about when we say proximal, what is proximal? And Feldenkrais does this big rant about pelvis is the most proximal. So if I'm side bending like this, my pelvis is still and my upper trunk is relatively distal. He says we are where our pelvis is, and he does this whole big demo about if he puts his pelvis in or out and blah, blah, blah. So it's
Not here, the side flexion.
well, side flexion happens in here, right, and that's fine.
Yeah.
So it's this, it's my shoulder coming towards my hip. So you could say, you could take your shoulder closer to your hip, or you could find a way to take your hip closer to your shoulder.
We were thinking distal more in terms of the extremities, so your hands.
Yeah.
So that's why I was saying you can do that movement, you can lead with your hands. Is your hand moving you?
Yeah.
Rather than coming from here. So if you got rid of your hand and you're still doing it,
Yeah.
then it's proximal.
Oh, and I see your logic.
Yeah.
I see your logic. If you just slide your hand down the side of your leg,
It's still
feel the
possible
side bend.
because if I do this, then
Yeah.
it's still happening, movement's still happening.
Yeah.
Whereas you could do it if we were talking about the head being distal, which we were discussing yesterday, and you lead it with the chin. It's a different movement, and I think that's coming from the head, and that's where
Yeah.
it's
You're not exactly side
Yeah.
bending though.
No.
So you're bending in your hips. Your trunk is actually staying relatively still.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're, it's the relationship between your shoulder and your hip that needs to change for side bending. This is a very tricky movement.
But how about with a chair?
You got one? All right. Joel wants to
Oh,
do
you
one.
just literally lift your leg up.
That's hip movement.
Push into your left foot,
Yep.
so it's your calf moving your hip,
Yep.
or left foot.
Yep.
How about with a chair, this one?
Yep. That's side bending.
And that's proximal to distal with the shoulder?
Yeah, is that shoulder proximal?
Well, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Shoulder girdle, pelvic girdle, which is proximal to which?
I actually think everyone could do it a bit differently, and they're doing that movement, they would start the movement somewhere differently, so it would be a different movement.
Possible.
Is it about where it starts, or is it about?
It's where the movement is happening. So with Deborah, when she does that, most of the movement is actually in her hips. So she is side bending from her hips as opposed to side bending in her trunk. It's where the movement is happening in which joints. So eventually, if Deborah goes far enough, her right shoulder is now closer to her hip. When she goes to the left, actually, she keeps her left side pretty long. See the difference? But she's different from one side to the other, which is very common. Does that make everyone know what I'm talking about? Whether if the bending is in the side of the trunk, it's side bending of the trunk. If you're dropping down to the side, but your trunk is staying in the same proportion as it were, then it's in that hips. It's AB adduction. Yeah, being a metronome or a Joel. Joel and metronome.
Joel in the box.
Joel and yeah.
Joel, no.
Yeah. Yeah. So as soon as you start getting into trunk motion, it's really complicated because there's so many joints that can do it. Move your trunk through space. All right, want to go around again?
I think so. Everybody's sitting down and sit with your legs to one side like we did right at the start. And the legs that the direction that your legs are pointing, use the other hand and stretch that out along the floor so it goes away from you to the side. So that's abducting. And you can continue going all the way down till you're lying on your side. And you can lift the arm on top up into the air, which is also abducting.
Yeah.
Okay, if you all can stand up, please.
Stop your complaining, old man.
We looked at the action, say, for an everyday activity like stepping, going to step up. So, and there was a bit of discussion here. but I think what it is, I've forgotten the word now, distal and a proximal, wasn't it? Proximal, back, extend leg up, which becomes distal, is that right? Oh, we had two ways.
Just explain exactly what you're doing, don't worry about it.
Yeah, okay, so proximal back, distal up, distal down, proximal up. That would be possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Going upstairs. Going upstairs. So yeah, you're.
So then we were looking at flexion in the hip,
Yep.
flexion, and which I thought was a bit like when we brought the legs up, you know, when we were getting that unusual
Yeah.
opposite flexion,
Yeah.
which explained a lot about why I don't go upstairs very efficiently. Expecting good results now. So yeah, because I'll be changing that movement. Before I think I was distal, proximal,
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
distal, proximal.
Yeah. Now, if you sit down slowly, no, on the chair behind you, just slowly sit. Watch her hips. What's her hips doing now as she sits? Flexing, and what's moving relative to what?
So then my distal.
Your distal are fixed and your proximal's coming down to your distals, as it were. Your pelvis is, and then coming up. So there you go. That's proximal coming towards distal. Your pelvis is going closing, and then opposite again. There you go. Yeah. That's it. Oh, sorry. I can't help myself. I'm just so bossy, aren't I? Sorry, team. You get the credit for that one.
Well, anyway, just kneel on your, oh yes, yeah, kneel on your knees and hands, and put your elbows onto the floor. Make sure that your knees are underneath your hips. Yep. And then push into your hands to make your chest lift. Push into your hands to make your chest lift. Yep, good, nice. And that's pushing with your arm. And then, yep, and then from there, come back down. And then move your hips onto your feet. And that's...
She's a mix, that one.
Great, yep.
There's always one in every crowd. Just ignore her. She don't need to.
There we go.
All right, so there are two proximals moving. Very good. Very good.
So if everyone could stand up.
I didn't say anything.
Okay. So then, if you put your hand out to the side, so you're staying in this plane, if you push your palm towards the floor, and at the same time take the same foot off the ground.
Oh, very interesting.
So that's side flexion of the spine.
That's a very funky dance move, isn't it? I think Joel's going to try that on the dance floor.
She's practicing root her 70s party.
This is the 20s dance.
Yeah. Cool. Very good. You want to do
So what is it?
side flexion? Well, we've abandoned the proximal distal of the tree. It's too hard. But they're moving both. So the pelvis is coming up towards the shoulder girdle, and the shoulder girdle is coming down towards the pelvis. So they're both moving. Whichever you want is moving. If you just dropped your shoulder and kept your pelvis still, it would be shoulder girdle moving relative to pelvis. But they did both because I wanted it to be funky. All right.
We'd like you to sit back down again with your legs to one side. Please. Now you just need to make sure you've got room sideways. That's all. So, as we did before, can you abduct your arm away from your legs to the side along the floor, please? Great. And come back up. So that is distal to proximal. Now, if you want to abduct halfway out, distal to proximal, then lean on it and push your body away.
Ah, yes, lift your bottom. Beautiful.
Proximal to distal.
Got that? Very nice. You had fun, you lot. Liz up. Great, we love you. Dan's a drinking man, he's going to bend his elbow drinking. Beer man.
Oh my God.
Just stand up.
You didn't think of that. You're not Aussie man. Sorry.
This is the elbow. Just touch the floor, lean forward and touch the floor. And now bend your elbow. So I'm not sure what that is.
We don't have another one.
Yeah. And then try and go up to standing. And that's so I think that's proximal to distal, and then distal to proximal.
Yeah. So distal's going first because you're extending away. Yeah. And then if you keep your elbow grounded and then take your proximal down, and then that coming together. All right, last one.
I was thinking with the proximal distal thing, and I said, okay, drop your arm up to see what is actually moving as a proximal movement. Are we talking about the thing that is creating the movement, or the thing that is pushing along the movement, or extending the movement, or?
So we don't use the word creating a movement because it's the muscles that create the movement. So we talk about what are the two segments. There are two segments that can move, right? I mean, obviously, if you really simplify a movement, there's two segments that can move. Like let's say my hand segment and my forearm segment. And this one can move relative to my forearm, or my forearm can move relative to my hand. The movement is in or happening at this joint. And it's a movement of, that would be a movement of flexion, that would be movement, extension, that would be movement of flexion. So all I've asked you is the direction and where the movement is happening, in which joint. And it's a movement of this segment or this segment, but I'll let you decide which one it is. Now in this case, this is the distal segment and this is more proximal because it's closer to me in this instance. Right, so proximal and distal can also be relative.
That's what I was going to say, is it general or is it relative?
It can be relative, yeah. So that's why these guys had it a bit tough because they had to be relative. So this is proximal relative to this. Pelvis is always proximal. Sorry?
Why is that extension?
In my wrist. In my wrist. I was using my wrist.
This is considered
Flexion, extension. That's like extensors.
Hang on. So that's flexion,
Yeah.
that's extension,
Yeah.
that's flexion, that's extension.
No, that's extension. You flipped your arm over. It's always extension. If it's the dorsal surfaces coming together, the general rule is that's extension.
So that's just clear extension.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, and that's flexion because it's the ventral surfaces, like the belly surfaces coming together. Yeah.
So if everyone could sit down with their legs crossed. Do the backing movement again. So arms down, and I'd like to put one hand on the floor straight out from where your hip joint is. And then I want you to move your left ear towards your back of your palm. Yeah?
Yeah.
That ear flexion.
So side flexing in the neck and in the trunk as well. There's two lots of side flexing. your left shoulder is going closer to your left hip, so side flips in the trunk as well. Or you could do it that way. So Joel's doing, if you take your shoulder down, take your left shoulder down to your left. Now you're taking your left hip up to your left shoulder. Take your left shoulder down. Keep your left hip on the floor. Yeah, so that's your left shoulder going down. Or you can keep your shoulder still and take your hip up. He's much better at taking his hip up than his shoulder down. Or you can take both together, right?
Well, it would be easy if it that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, now you can do it. That kind of clear? So in that instance, proximal distal is kind of irrelevant because is your shoulder more proximal or your pelvis more proximal? Gordon Christ himself would say pelvis.
But my query was, does it matter if I say the ear is distal?
Oh yeah, that makes it more distal, yeah, that's right. It's free to do. Yeah.
So you can use any part, not necessarily relevant, particularly relevant.
Yep. Waking your head around. Yep. Okay, now you've earned your morning tea break. You resourceful people. That's resourceful.